Dr. Sarah Chen had been warned about the Vakri children before she accepted the teaching position on the diplomatic station orbiting Kepler 442b. The station administrators had pulled her aside 3 times during orientation, their faces grave with concern. "They're predators," Administrator Holloway had said, leaning forward across his desk. "Not metaphorically, literally. Their species evolved from pack hunters. The cubs are different from human children." Sarah had nodded politely, the same way she'd nodded through 100 similar warnings during her 15 years as an elementary school teacher. She'd worked with difficult children before. She'd handled classrooms in 3 different countries, managed kids with severe behavioral problems, and once talked down a teenager having a complete breakdown in the middle of finals week. How different could alien children really be? Very different, as it turned out. The Vakri cubs stood nearly 4 feet tall at age 6, with dense muscle structure that made them stronger than most adult humans. Their eyes were positioned forward on their faces, golden and unblinking, with pupils that contracted to thin slits in bright light. Their hands ended in retractable claws that they hadn't quite learned to control yet. When they smiled, they showed rows of pointed teeth designed for tearing meat. On her first day, Sarah stood at the front of the classroom and watched 12 Vakri cubs file in, their movements unnervingly fluid and synchronized. They moved like a pack because they were a pack. Their parents served in the Vakri delegation, and these children represented the first generation to receive education alongside other species. The classroom had been modified for them. The furniture was reinforced steel instead of plastic. The windows were triple-paned with wire mesh between the layers. There were no sharp objects, no loose items that could become projectiles, and a panic button installed every 6 feet along the walls. Sarah smiled at them, the same warm smile she'd given every class on every first day. "Good morning. My name is Miss Sarah, and I'm excited to meet all of you." The cubs stared at her with those unsettling golden eyes. One of them, a female with darker fur patterns on her arms, tilted her head sideways in a gesture that Sarah's cultural training told her was curiosity, or possibly aggression. The manual hadn't been entirely clear. "You are small," the cub said in carefully pronounced standard. "Are you sick?" Sarah laughed, a genuine sound that echoed in the reinforced room. "No, I'm healthy. Humans are just smaller than Vakri. What's your name?" "I am Kiraval." The cub's ears twitched. "Will you teach us to hunt?" "I'll teach you mathematics, reading, and science," Sarah replied. "The same subjects your parents learned when they were young." A male cub in the back row made a sound that the translator interpreted as disappointed. Another one yawned, showing every single one of those impressive teeth. The first week was rough. The cubs had short attention spans and enormous energy. They needed to move constantly, needed to roughhouse and play fight during breaks. Sarah learned quickly that what looked like violence to her was actually how they socialized. When 2 cubs tackled each other and rolled across the floor, growling and snapping, they were bonding. She adapted. She threw out half her lesson plans and rewrote them to include movement. Math became a game played across the entire room, with cubs leaping from station to solve problems. Reading time happened in a pile on the reinforced floor mats, with the cubs sprawled across each other in a heap that seemed uncomfortable, but which they insisted was natural. They were smart, she discovered. Incredibly smart. Once she figured out how to work with their instincts instead of against them, they absorbed information like sponges. Kiraval could calculate orbital mechanics in her head. A quiet male named Dreshik memorized entire textbook chapters after reading them once. They challenged each other constantly, competing for the best scores, the quickest answers, the most creative solutions. But they were also still children. They got frustrated when problems were too hard. They squabbled over supplies and toys. They tattled on each other with the same petty grievances that human 6-year-olds brought to their teachers. Sarah treated them exactly the way she'd treated every class, with patience, with consistency, with clear rules and fair enforcement. When they misbehaved, she corrected them firmly but kindly. When they succeeded, she praised them enthusiastically. When they were upset, she listened. The cubs seemed confused by this at first. They tested her constantly, pushing boundaries, waiting for her to react with fear or aggression. When she didn't, when she just calmly redirected them back to appropriate behavior, something shifted. 3 weeks into the term, a cub named Teskra accidentally broke his datapad by squeezing it too hard during a frustrating assignment. He'd stared at the cracked screen, his ears flat against his head, and made a low, whining sound. Sarah had knelt beside him, ignoring the way the other cubs tensed, ready to defend their packmate if she threatened him. "It's okay," she'd said softly. "Accidents happen. Let's get you a new one, and we can practice being more gentle with our tools." Teskra had looked at her with those golden eyes, his pupils wide and round. "You are not angry?" "No, sweetheart. You didn't break it on purpose." He'd reached out with one clawed hand and very, very carefully touched her arm, the first time any of the cubs had voluntarily made physical contact with her. "You are strange," he'd said, but his tone was warm. The breakthrough came 5 weeks into the semester. Sarah's mother called during her lunch break, and the conversation went badly. Her mother was sick again. The treatment wasn't working as well as the doctors had hoped, and Sarah was too far away to help. By the time she ended the call, her hands were shaking. She had 15 minutes before the cubs returned from their physical education period. 15 minutes to pull herself together, to lock away the fear and grief and helplessness. She was a professional. She could handle this. But when she tried to stand, her legs wouldn't cooperate. She sank back into her chair and pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting the tears that wanted to come. She thought she was alone. She thought she had time. The door opened. The cubs poured in, all noise and energy, shoving each other and chattering. Then they went silent. Sarah looked up to find 12 pairs of golden eyes fixed on her face, on the tears she hadn't been able to stop. "Miss Sarah?" Kira Val stepped forward, her ears pricked with concern. "Are you injured?" "No, I'm fine." Sarah wiped at her cheeks, trying to smile. "Just a sad phone call. I'm okay." But she wasn't okay, and the cubs knew it. Their species had evolved to read body language, to sense weakness and injury in potential prey. They could tell she was lying. What happened next was something Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. Kira Val turned to the other cubs and made a series of soft clicking sounds, too fast for the translator to catch. The cubs scattered across the classroom, moving with purpose. Within seconds, they began returning to Sarah's desk. Dreshik brought his favorite puzzle cube, the one he'd gotten perfect scores with all month. He placed it carefully on the desk beside her and backed away. Teskra added a small carved stone his father had given him, something Sarah knew he treasured. One by one, the cubs brought their possessions and piled them on her desk, in her lap, around her feet. Toys, trinkets, drawings, the sticks they chewed on during thinking time. A female named Liska brought her entire collection of shiny pebbles. Another cub added a picture book that was clearly well-loved, its corners worn soft. They gave her everything they had. Then they settled on the floor around her chair, pressing close, and went absolutely quiet. In Vakri culture, Sarah remembered from her training, silence was sacred. Predators went silent when one of the pack was hurt. They stayed close, stayed watchful, stayed protective. Sarah looked down at the pile of treasures, at the cubs gathered at her feet like a living wall between her and the world, and started crying harder. But this time they were different tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Kira Val reached up and very gently patted Sarah's knee with one clawed hand. Pack takes care of Pack, she said simply. They stayed that way for 20 minutes, the cubs maintaining their vigil while Sarah pulled herself back together. They didn't ask questions. They didn't demand explanations. They just stayed, solid and warm and present, the way they would for any member of their pack who was hurting. When Sarah finally felt steady enough to teach again, the cubs returned to their seats without being asked. But they left their toys on her desk. "We will learn good today," Dreshik announced solemnly, "so you can be happy." And they did. They worked harder that afternoon than they'd worked all month, completing assignments with fierce concentration, competing to bring her the best results. Every time Sarah praised someone, all 12 cubs perked up, their ears forward, their eyes bright. They were trying to make her feel better the only way they knew how. After class, when the cubs had been collected by their parents, Administrator Holloway stopped by Sarah's classroom. He stared at the pile of toys still covering her desk. "What happened here?" he asked. Sarah smiled, running her fingers over Dreshik's puzzle cube. "They saw me cry," she said, "so they gave me everything they had." Holloway's eyebrows rose. "The Vakri cubs?" "The predators?" "Yes," Sarah said. "The children." She kept every single toy on her desk for the rest of the year, a small mountain of treasures that reminded her why she taught. The cubs would come in each morning and check to make sure their offerings were still there, their ears forward with satisfaction when they saw that Sarah had kept them safe. Word spread through the station about what had happened. Other teachers shared knowing looks when they saw Sarah in the halls. The Vakri parents, fierce warriors who had fought in 3 major conflicts, would nod to her with something that looked like respect when they picked up their cubs. Kiraval's mother, a decorated commander named Shiral Ek, stopped Sarah one afternoon. "My daughter tells me you are packed now," she said, her translator giving her voice a warm rumble. "This is not given lightly among our people." Sarah thought about the cubs pressing close, offering everything they valued to comfort her pain. "I'm honored," she said, and meant it. The rest of the school year flew by. The cubs learned their lessons and exceeded every expectation. They also learned from Sarah, though not just academics. They learned that strength could be gentle, that leadership could be kind, that protecting the pack didn't always mean fighting. On the last day of school, the cubs brought their toys back. One by one, they reclaimed their treasures from Sarah's desk, tucking them away in their bags. But Kiraval left her offering. A small metal figure her father had made, depicting a Vakri warrior in full armor. "You keep this," Kiraval said, "to remember that you are pack." "Always." Sarah's eyes burned with tears again, but this time she didn't hide them. "I'll treasure it," she promised. The cubs gathered around her one last time, pressing close in that protective circle they'd formed months ago, and Sarah understood, finally, what the administrators had been trying to warn her about. The Vakri cubs were predators, yes. They were strong and fierce and built for hunting, but they were also capable of profound empathy, of recognizing pain and responding with compassion. They had pack instincts that ran deeper than any human understanding of family. They had seen her cry, these dangerous predator children, and their first instinct hadn't been to exploit weakness. It had been to comfort, to protect, to give everything they had if it might help. Sarah Chen had taught hundreds of children over her career. But these cubs, these supposedly dangerous alien predators, had taught her something too. That kindness transcends species, that empathy is not weakness, and that sometimes the most fearsome creatures have the biggest hearts. She stood at the classroom door and watched the cubs leave for the last time, already roughhousing and play-fighting as they headed toward their parents. Kiraval turned back once and met Sarah's eyes across the hallway. The cub's ears went forward. Sarah smiled. Pack, she thought. Always pack.